I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Friday, April the 3rd, brought to you in part by Zactran. Stress opens a gate for BRD. Slam it shut today with Zactran, the fast-acting antibiotic for treatment and control of bovine respiratory disease. Remember to observe the 35-day withdrawal period after treatment. Visit Zactran.com or talk with your BI rep for more information. The intrinsic value, one of my favorite contacts that I talk to several times a week has been mentioning this to me several times, and I think we're about there. You think, well, what's intrinsic value? That's the value of what something really is. Not the market value, not what it costs, not the price of it, but what it's really worth. I mean, if we didn't have all these outside factors affecting things, you know, is a new pickup that's got everything you need on it really worth $70,000 or $80,000? Of course not. What's the intrinsic value of it? Well, what it saves you, what you can do with it, you know, the transportation it provides and everything. You know, maybe $25,000 or $30,000 or something like that, but you can't get one for that. But it's not the market value of it, it's not the manufacturer's suggested retail price of it, but the intrinsic value. But cattle have an intrinsic value. They're worth something. Not having to do with the market value or what they're bringing or how much supply and demand is and all that, but they're worth something. You know, it's a protein product. You know, it'll keep you living, and it's a good source of balanced diet if that's what you want to use it for. The offal, the byproducts are worth something, and these cattle are worth something. That's their intrinsic value, and I think we're getting pretty close, guys. It's getting way down there. If you haven't noticed, the last couple of days they have taken hunks out of this cattle market, but everybody keeps talking about whether they're going to be able to keep these plants open or not. There's been a lot of kind of overblown coverage of that. Basically, our slaughter for the week is not a whole lot less than what it was. Yeah, some of these plants, including JBS at Greeley, is having trouble with their workers, having trouble getting them to work, and then the union's starting to come in there, and they're wanting to kind of use their leverage and try to get a little more money for them. And that stuff's going to happen. Then they had to slow the chain speeds down a little bit for that. Well, they'll probably, for those that do want to work and they're glad that they have a job, they'll probably work a little bit more on Saturday, or they'll do things to try to pick that up. But other than that plant, the JBS plant up in Pennsylvania there that's shut down due to sickness in their work line there, everybody else is kind of keeping going. Maybe some little deals here and there are dark, but for the most part they're up and going, and we're keeping things going. You know, this national emergency, we got to keep the food going. And it's funny, if you look around and notice, and you kind of hope that your consumers notice that everybody's shut in, but you know, ag is exempt. All kinds of ag are exempt. If you need to go take care of some cattle, no problem. You can be out running around. If you've got to see about putting your fertilizer down on your fields, or some places are planting, no problem. You can take care of that. If you just need to check the fence on a deal, you can do that. We've got to have agriculture because people got to eat, and we got to keep that moving. If you're trucking cattle, you're trucking some type of an ag product, no problem. Of course, it seems like we've got kind of a problem with our logistics and getting things trucked right now because all of a sudden your box beef cutout values have started to fade off, and these end users are not buying as much of it. That's why the values are going down. They're not buying too much right now. But a lot of us go into our local grocery stores, and still we're not seeing the meat shelves fully packed yet. But a lot of that product is kind of in the pipeline somewhere, and it's not getting really to where it needs to go. But maybe they're kind of stocking up their coffers and trying to pull back a little bit and get these packers to pull back on what they're charging for this meat, which is working great. Just good old supply and demand. But there could be a hole in these fat cattle. I know these fat cattle are dropping like a rock now, and we know we got big supplies of them coming. But if we look beyond that, we haven't been able to put many cattle on feed here the last 6 weeks or so. They haven't been available to sell. People have been scared to sell them. The cattle haven't been able to be purchased where they can hedge them. And none of your corporate feeders are going to buy cattle that they can't hedge up pretty good. And a lot of your smaller outfits can't buy them because their lending institutions won't let them have the money if they don't get them hedged up and protected there. And in these volatile times, you can sure see why. But, you know, I think a lot of us are kind of thinking that there might be a hole in your finished fat cattle after we get through the big market ready supplies, whenever we get into the later part of the fall, maybe October to December, since we haven't been putting any cattle on feed here too much here the last month, maybe 6 weeks, ever since this coronavirus come on. And your cattle feeders are needing to put some cattle on feed. They're wanting to buy some. They've got some empty pens they'd like to fill up, but they can't buy any cattle that they can hedge. So a lot of them have been throwing in on the downside of the board to make it crater and get those feeder cattle cheap enough because for some reason we seem to price things off of the futures market instead of just what's in the open cash market. But everybody looks to the futures market. So if you crater the futures market, then your cash market's going to go down instead of the other way around is what it should be. But the hell of it is, as hard as they push down on these feeder cattle futures and try to get your feeder cattle cheaper, your fats are going down almost as fast. On Tuesday, they were both down the limit, expanded limits at 4.5. Well, now your feeder cattle have gone on to $6.75 down the limit, and your fat cattle are still at $4.50 down the limit. So not sure how many days of this limit down it's going to take before we get to that intrinsic value, and we may even go below it. But your guys are wanting to buy some cattle that they can protect on the board, but that live cattle board is just going down, and this is a total wreck. Guys, we've got to get something passed while our awareness is high, while everybody's talking about this, while it's on the surface. We've got to get something done that will protect the industry down the road. And the one that I think is the best idea is to require 30% minimum volume per week negotiated cash trade to your major packers within a 14-day delivery. We're getting some paperwork worked up on that. We're going to see who's behind it. I can't wait to announce who all's behind it, and more so, I can't wait to announce who's not behind it. Who wouldn't like to have a minimum of 30%, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, guys, but we've been kind of running 12 to 15. But it's funny here during this big market crash, during this crisis, we've been running up there in the mid to high 20s. If we could mandate 30% minimum negotiated cash, it would help your cattle feeders, your feedlots sit back a little bit, kind of monitor the situation, and try to hold a little bit of leverage on these packers, just a little bit. Right now, they're just market takers. So many of them don't even end up being able to sell anything cash. They just have to turn it in on the grid, and that's the way your packers want it. They want captive supplies, and they want to run the show, and they've been running it for a long time, and they've just about run it into the ground. And we need to take some of it back, or we're just going to have to give up. But one thing I thought was interesting is you see how much that we're talking about your cattle producers, talking about the packers. You know, the packers have gouged the consumers. The packers have manipulated our market. The packers are taking all the gravy of the few places you can see where all this money that's been lost has been piled up. It's been in the packers' pockets. They're not your friend, guys. And, like 20 years ago, you always heard people say, oh, we're working for the consumer, and we've got to work hand in hand with these packers. But the packers have been screwing the cattle people at every juncture, and they're not your friend. They don't want to help you out. They're making a living off you. They're making big profits off you. They're paying big dividends to their stockholders and their board members on you. And you wonder where, the beef checkoff deal is, Why do we continue to support that when it's basically just paying for your packer? Now, I'm not saying that we don't have to have some promotion. I'm not saying that we need to find cuts that don't have a lot of value, figure out a way to add value to them, show consumers how to do that. I think it's a great idea. But the heck of it is, your packers aren't paying a dime for that beef promotion. They're enjoying it all, and they don't. I've always thought, let's just charge one time. Instead of all these brand inspectors and these market people trying to collect that dollar everywhere and everybody bitching about it, let's just charge like $5 to the packers for every one that they kill. And we have a record of it. USDA keeps a record of how many they slaughter in each plant every day, and then have the packers say, pay $5 a head right there, and then just let it trickle down. That would be a fair way to do it, but your packers do not pay a dime, and so they don't have to advertise their product. We've got your cattle people advertising their product. And my friend John Campbell, that manages Winter Livestock in La Junta, he does a similar broadcast like this for his market there in La Junta, and I tell you what, he hit the nail on the head. He's got some good analogies in there. I love the way he gives his market report and his commentary there. But he said, you know, the producers paying the dollar to promote beef. You know, we're in the cattle business, not the beef business. If we were in the beef business, we'd be walking around just as fat and happy as your packers were. But we're just in the cattle business. We don't get to take advantage of the beef. But your cattle producers promoting beef and paying for that promotion is a lot like a cotton farmer supporting underwear sales. And that's John Campbell's. That's not mine, but I thought he hit the nail on the head there. And I know you guys that are beef checkoff people are going to say, oh, you shouldn't talk bad about the beef checkoff. It's just not fair that your packers don't have to pay it. They enjoy it. How much do they spend advertising beef, your beef packers? They don't have to advertise it. They don't need to. You know, cattle people are doing it for them. Let's look at the board for Thursday. April live cattle futures down the limit, $4.50 at 92.82. That's your spot live cattle futures. June down 4.5 at 83.07. Now I have to believe that we're going to get some support, bottom side support around that $80. Now you get much lower than $80. I think that's probably the intrinsic value for finished cattle is around $80. You get below that, we're already below the cost of production. That's not what I'm talking about with intrinsic value. I'm just talking about, by God, you can you know, kill that thing yourself and chop it up and live on it for $80. You know, you sure need that. But that was down to 3 and the limit 4.5. All the rest of your out front live cattle futures down from 350 to the 450 limit. April feeder cattle down the limit, 675 is the limit on those now. And your April spot is the lowest contract that's traded at 110.67 based on an 800-pound steer. Now we've taken out the lifetime lows on your live cattle, and we're working on all of them on the feeder cattle, but your lowest contract there is your spot April feeder cattle at 110.67. It hadn't been that long ago, not even 10 days ago, that we were selling some cattle like that in the 150s. 140s was pretty easy, you know, you go back before that. Now 110.67, and your buyers are working to try to get your cash market that low, and they're having pretty good luck with it. May feeder cattle down to 675 limit and 111.65, and then your out fronts from there were down 675 all the way through October, and then they kind of backed up a little bit from there. Your fat cattle trade has been very, very quiet the middle of the week. Ever since the bottom fell out of this thing on Wednesday, we haven't seen anything, and I think your cattle feeders are just aghast at how much cheaper things have got, and they don't want to give up, even though they could probably sell them pretty good still and get a hell of a nice basis there, but their heart won't let them do it, thank goodness. But I'm not sure if we're even going to see any more trade this week. Through Wednesday, we had 20,200 head sell, which is nothing. The only deal we saw on Thursday was out in Nebraska, confirmed about 2,200 head, and it was all one deal at 114 delivered. Not sure where those cattle were located, but you put the delivery in there, was probably right in there with what the bulkier cattle have brought this week, which is 112, and that's $8 lower. Your dress sales were 175 to mostly 180. That was $10 lower, but very, very quiet. And Packers not even acting like they need any cattle. Well, they're going to need them, guys, and it's just whether or not at the point where your cattle feeders have the nerve to hold out and try to hold the cash market together or not. But man, this futures market has completely fallen out of bed. Box beef cutout values were lower on Thursday, but not as sharply as they have been earlier in the week. Choice cuts on Thursday afternoon, 230, 264, down 253. Selects 222.12, down 301. You got a choice select spread there about $10.50, but still no movement. Only 115 loads of cuts, grinds, and trimmings. Your slaughter for the week through Thursday, 467,000. That's only 17,000 less than that monster week we had a week ago, and 15,000 less than the same week a year ago. Let's look at your feeder cattle market. Your real-time index on DV auction late in the day on Thursday at 121.65, down $4.28. Now, a 7-day moving average index price like that up through the middle 12 states, down $4.28 in one day. That is a ton. But that 121.65 is your real-time index. Your steer tracker, which is the latest packages of those index cattle, 118.20. So you know where we're headed. Your CME cash feeder cattle index is running way behind. The last available is still way up there at 126.09, but it'll catch up eventually, I promise. Look at your big sales. Winter livestock in Pratt, Kansas, 6,800 head. And I tell you, this is just a shame. The government market report was not available when I recorded this. It's funny how when things are really shook up and you really need that information, it's not available. But not available there press time for this report. But I looked at your automated feeder cattle report on Cattle Market Central from Pratt, Kansas there, and you can look and just see the differences in the weighted average price from last week. Your feeder steers, $15 to $27 lower, and you think, oh my gosh, that's crazy, never been that lower. No way. Hey, Salina was about the same way, and that was a federal state market report. Your steer calves, $11 to $14 lower. Heifers, all weights, $5 to $17 lower. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And people brought nearly 7,000 head to town there in Pratt. And I tell you what, it just makes you sick. And the fear, I tell you what, it's just unbelievable. But you look at the probably the best quote that I saw from Pratt on Thursday was 69 head, 760-pound steers at 121. There was a lot of the 9 weights. A lot of the 9-weight steers, loads of them, guys, sell them from 95 to $1. A lot of them in the 90s, and that's the market. Farmers and Ranchers Livestock, Salina, Kansas, 3,900 head. Federal State Market Report called feeder steers $17 to $27 lower, and I commend that market reporter for doing what he should have, or her. I'm not sure who does that anymore. Your calves are $14 to $18 lower. Feeder heifers $12 to $20 lower. The absolute best quote I saw in feeder steers out of Salina was 121 head string, weighed 803 at 114.25. Ouch. How about some other markets that typically do real well? Mitchell Livestock in Mitchell, South Dakota had 2,700 head there. Market was $12 to $23 lower. I always tell you guys, they sell those big warmed up feeder cattle better than anybody, but they had some here on Thursday, 104 head, weighed 1047 at 102.75, and that's a hell of a price, guys. You can't get that anywhere else on some cattle weighing that much. Ogallala Livestock in Ogallala, Nebraska, 3,600 head there. They didn't call a trend because they didn't have a sale last week. I took a peek at the 2 weeks ago market, and it looked kind of $6 to $12 lower. But if you remember, last week the market's got a big charge, and Ogallala didn't have a sale, so that kind of seems right at $6 to $12 lower compared to 2 weeks ago. But the best quote I saw out of there, and the best quote I saw all day on Thursday on feeder cattle, was 63 head of 823 pound steers at 123.75. And that's your feeder flash for Friday.